All right, Javosai, good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Sivan, Stephen Tarizin, for dedicating all of Shur Drashos this month. Gratitude to Hashem as they welcome their fifth grandchild, Gavriel Amichai Zin, and Le'ilui Nishmas, Steve's mother, Doris Zin, Devora Basra B'Yisrael Yoel. Zichron Lebracha. Sheni Avram Kelman from Eretz Yisrael, commemoration of the yard site of Avram's father, Rafael Yechiel ben Avram, Zichron Lebracha. Our week of learning sponsors, Beryl and Rachel Golkin, in Zchus of Refuah Shlema for their nephew, Chaim Meir ben Cyril Bluma, and our Daf Yomi sponsors today. Incredible sponsorship in honor of Mr. Morton Esterson's 98th birthday. By his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, Mr. Esterson, who is a tremendous pillar of our Kehila, a multi-generational, the Esterson Mishpacha. Well, thank you so much. Multi-generational pillars of our Kehila. And Amir Tzchashbrach, who should just bench Mr. Esterson with Arichos Yamim V'Shanim, Hatzlacha, Mazel, Bracha, Nachos, and Gesund Admea Ve'esrim Shanim Tovos. I will say with that, let us begin. A lot to do today, Baruch Hashem, as we approach the finish line with Maseches Bava Metzia with incredible excitement. So we'll say, we left today's Daf is Kuf Yud Ches 118. We left off yesterday with the rebuilding of the case. So we'll say, let's actually pick up. You see where Tosas is. Tosis lo lazeh velo lazeh. You see that in the right-hand column. If you just move your finger leftward, you will see exactly where we are up to in the Gemara. So remember, again, we're talking about if the Reuven and Shimon go ahead and own a two-story home jointly, it falls down. Now they want to rebuild it. So the issue the Gemara is now dealing with, if they want to make certain changes within the structure, are they permitted to do so? So we'll say, the bottom line to always remember is as follows. Whatever changes will greater enhance, and when I say enhance, I really mean strengthen or solidify the structure, they're allowed to do. Anything that ultimately, again, could erode the structural integrity or weaken the structure, they're not allowed to do. That's pretty much the principle. Here's the application. So let's go back. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara, I believe we left off with bricks. So the Gemara says, so let's say again, we're talking about another lower story. We'll call Reuven the lower story guy. Reuven wants to go ahead and change the ceiling slash the floor to the second story. He wants to go ahead and it was using sycamore wood. He wants to now use cedar wood. Shomelo. Cedar wood apparently is stronger than sycamore. Bishkamim ain't shomelo. If he wants to switch it to sycamore, we don't listen to him. Lema'id bechalonos shomelo. This is interesting. Let's say Reuven wants to rebuild the lower story and he wants to rebuild it with fewer windows. So the halacha is we listen to him. We'll say the idea is obviously if there's a window, it means the wall's not solid. The less solid part of the wall, the less strength the wall has. Therefore, by definition, the less windows, the stronger the wall. So if Reuven wants to go ahead and diminish the number of windows, Shomelo, laharbos bechalonos in Shomelo. Reuven decides, you know what, I really want more natural light, I want to add more windows, we do not listen to him. Lagbia in Shomelo, if he wants to make the ceiling higher, wants to make the structure higher, we do not listen to him. Lema'id Shomelo, if he wants to make it lower, we listen to him. So up until now, this has all been speaking about Reuven, when rebuilding the first floor, wants to go and make certain changes. What about Elyon Shabal Shanos? What about now Shimon? So now we'll say Reuven rebuilt his first story. Shimon now wants to rebuild the second story, and Shimon also wants to make some changes. What type of changes? Elyon Shabal Shanos begazis Shomelo bigvil in Shomelo. So we'll say, remember again, a lot of these things are going to be just the opposite in the second story. So for example, if let's say now Shimon, the second story guy, wants to use unhewn stone instead of hewn stone, he's not allowed to do that. Now, why not? Now, I remember again, just to contrast it, Reuven, when he was rebuilding, if he wanted to switch to unhewn stone from hewn stone, it was mutter. Why was it mutter? Unhewn stone is thicker, therefore the wall is more solid. That works fine on the first floor. The problem is, if you do that on the upper floor, what happens? It's more weight bearing on the lower part of the structure, and therefore again could potentially erode the integrity. So he's not allowed to do that. Bikfisin in Shomelo, Belevenim Shomelo. If he wants to switch to split bricks, half bricks, so we don't let them do that, because remember again, a half brick wall was 2 half bricks side by side with mortar in the middle. That would be thicker, therefore heavier. You can't do it. However, bilaveinim shomalo. But if he wants these switch to regular bricks, we listen to him, making the wall lighter. Ba'arazim in shomalo, b'shikma shomalo. If he wants to switch to cedar wood for the upper story, we don't listen to him. Again, that's heavier. If he wants to go to switch to sycamore wood, we listen to him. L'rabos bechalonos shomalo. Let's say again, Shimon wants to add more windows. We listen to him, right? Because at the end of the day, again, adding more windows will lighten the load on the lower structure. L'ma'it bechalonos in shomalo. But let's say Shimon wants to decrease the number of windows in his structure, we do not listen to him. Lagbia in shomalo. If he wants to make his portion, his upper story taller, we don't listen to him. Lema'it shomalo. Wants to make it shorter, we listen to him. So we'll say, so again, the principle itself is a very simple one. So once again, when rebuilding, either party could change as long as the change has no detrimental effect on the integrity of the structure. If it does, then it is not permitted. Incredible. Ein lo lazeh velo lazeh mai. So we'll say this is a very interesting case over here. Let's listen to the following scenario. Let's say the structure falls down, and neither Reuven nor Shimon have the means to rebuild it. They don't have the money. In lo lazeh velo lazeh mai. What's the halacha? So Tanya, in lo lazeh v'lo lazeh, in lo l'ba'aliyah, fine. So Gemara says, Tanya, b'nasan omer. Now we'll say, now the shaila that the Gemara is asking is like this. Reuven and Shimon, it's the same case, right? They live jointly. They live jointly in this 2-story apartment, 2-story building, 2-story house. Now, again, they want to go ahead and it falls down. Neither has the ability to rebuild it. Now, look at Rashi. Rashi's in the 3rd wide line in. Ein lo lazeh v'lo lazeh, livnos she'aniyim hein, ubala karka rotze limkar hakarka. So we'll say, so now, let's call it for argument's sake that Reuven, the 1st floor guy, wants to sell the property, wants to sell the real estate. So now we'll say, so now the shaila is, he's going to sell it. Does Shimon, the upper story guy, have some stake in the property? Because understand, even though Reuven might be the titular owner, so to speak, of the property, Lamaisa, by not rebuilding it, Shimon is losing out on a place to live. So does that give Shimon some level of claim within the property itself? So the Gemara says this, so it's a very interesting case here. So the Gemara says, Tanya b'nasan omer, tachton otal shnei chalakim ba'alyon shlish. Yeah. So Reuven, the lower story guy, will take 2/3 of the sale of the property, and Shimon, the upper story guy, will take 1/3. And with that 1/3, now he has the ability to find himself a new place to live. The Achirim say, tachton otal shlosh chalakim ba'alyon al trivia. The Achirim say, no, Reuven, the lower story guy, will take 3/4, and Shimon, the upper story guy, will take 1/4. Amar Rabbi says, Nakot the Rabbi Nasan biadech. So really you should adopt the position of Rabbi Nasan. Rabbi Nasan, the 2/3, 1/3. Why? The dainohu v'nochis lo umka dedina. Rabbi Nasan was a dayan. He was a judge, and he really understands the depth and complexity of these legalities. Kasara kama mafsir aliyah bias. So it's an interesting. Where does he come up with the 2/3, 1/3 split? He says, what is essentially the cost of having an upper story? In other words, by having a one-story home, that home would have a particular, we'll call it lifespan. Now, when you put a 2nd story on that home, so apparently, again, that diminishes the use of the 1st story, just because, I guess, of the ongoing weight and pressure. So how much does it cut, so to speak, the shelf life of the 1st story by having a 2nd story? So the Gemara says, Tilsa, interesting, by 1/3. Obviously, again, also I guess reflective of whatever construction they were using. So again, if you would have a rancher home, right, it would last 3 times as long as having a 2-story home. So therefore, the halacha is hilchach islu tilsa. So you see from here that essentially the value of the upper story is 1/3, and the value of the lower story is 2/3. Okay, so Rabbi says, so Lamaisa, again, that becomes the formula, and therefore halacha Lamaisa, in a case where they don't have the money to rebuild, they sell off the land, bottom story guy takes 2/3, upper story guy takes 1/3, and Shalom al Yisrael. Incredible. Mishnah. V'chein beis habad shehu banoi b'sela. We'll say another very interesting case over here. So imagine the following scenario. You have a beis habad is an olive press. So you have an olive press that was carved out into a hill, into a mountain, essentially. Now, so the olive press, imagine for a moment, is on the side of the hill or mountain, whatever, side of the hill, and on top of it is a field. Top of it is a field, and the field is used for planting. Okay, now I'll say, now what happened? So the Gemara says, "V'chein beis habad shu banoi b'sela." So therefore, again, I have the olive press itself that is built into the side of the hill. V'gina achas al gabav, and there is a garden, there is a field on top of it. V'nifchas. Now, what ends up happening? The ceiling of the olive press caves in, and as a result, there's a gaping hole in the field. So this is very similar to the case that we just had before about again, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven living on the lower story, Shimon living on the upper story, and then the ceiling / floor between the two stories caves in. So in this case over here, the ceiling of the olive press caves in, and now there's a hole in the field. So what's the halacha? So I'll just point out over here. It's interesting. Rashi, look at Rashi, Beis Habad. There's 4 lines up from the bottom. Rashi says, "Bayis la'atzor zeisim v'gina achas al gabo shechakak adam b'sela tachteh kigon kipa v'haya ginasol amala u'beis bado milamato kishemes not lo banav ze Beis Habad v'ze gina." So it's interesting the way Rashi points this out. Rashi sets up this case as we'll call the guy Yaakov, right? So Yaakov owned a mountain. So Yaakov decided to go ahead and bore out a olive press in the side of his mountain, underneath his field, underneath his garden, right? And then he died, and his sons Reuven and Shimon, Reuven inherits the olive press, and Shimon inherits the field. Now it's interesting, why is Rashi setting this up as a case of Yerusha, right? Why is he setting it up as a case of inheritance? It could be, the reason why Rashi is doing that is because, I don't know, it could be that normally it would be usher to do something like this. In other words, that, let's say again, if Reuven, right, if Reuven owns the side of the mountain and Shimon owns the top of the mountain and Shimon has a field there, it could very well be that it would be prohibited for Reuven to go ahead and dig underneath the field and create the Beis Habad and create an olive press. So that's why Rashi sets it up that it was all owned by one person. If it's all owned by one person, Yaakov could do whatever he wants. Now Yaakov dies, his sons inherit the press and the field, and now again over time the ceiling of the press collapses, causing a gaping hole in the field. Okay, so what's the halacha? Back to the Mishnah. So the Gemara says, "Hari balagina yorid v'zorei lemata ad sheyaseh lebeis bado kipin." So what's the halacha? The owner of the field, in this case we'll call him Shimon. Shimon has a right to essentially go ahead and use the earth of the press to go ahead and plant. So in other words, since now there's a hole in the field, so essentially what's the halacha? Shimon, the owner of the field, could go downstairs. Right? This is similar to the halacha we saw. What do we see before? Right? Reuven's living on the lower story, Shimon's living on the upper story. What happens? The floor of Shimon's upper story apartment gets a hole, right? Reuven is not repairing it. So what's the halacha? Shimon can move downstairs and use the downstairs. So it's the same halacha over here. Now, again, the ceiling of the olive press, of Reuven's olive press, goes ahead and caves in. Therefore, there's a hole in Shimon's field, the upper story. So what could Shimon do? Shimon could go into the press, and assuming that, let's say, it's a dirt floor of the press, Shimon could go ahead and use that for planting to make up for the lost area of his field above. Fine. Until Reuven decides, of course, to repair the ceiling of his olive press. And again, remember, once Reuven repairs the ceiling of his olive press, then he goes in and he restores the ground, so to speak, the soil of the field. Fine. So Mor says, another interesting case. So let's say Reuven has a wall or he has a tree, and it fell into Rosh Hashanah and it caused damage. So imagine this case, right? Reuven's home, right? Reuven's sadeh, so literally is adjacent to the Rosh Hashanah. His tree or his wall fall into Rosh Hashanah, cause damage. So I'll say, it's interesting, the halacha is potter. Now, why is he potter? Because Rashi says over here, he's an anos. It's an extenuating circumstance. What should he have done? In other words, we're assuming over here that this is not a case of negligence, not a case where, remember, he planted within his field. The wall fell down. It wasn't a rickety wall, but the wall fell down, or the tree fell down. So Lamai said, this is a case of ones. Therefore, he's not chayiv for any damages that occurs. Now, the Gemara says, now what happens? So we'll say, what happens now if Beis Din saw that Reuven had a rickety wall, or Reuven had a shaky tree. So Beis Din comes to him and says, Reuven, you need to take down that tree, or take down that wall in X amount of time. And now what happens? V'naflu b'soch hazman. If the tree or the wall falls down, now if it falls down in the allotted time, so let's say for argument's sake, they give him 30 days, right? Within 30 days you have to take down that wall, 30 days you have to take down that tree. So the wall falls down day 21. So it falls down within the allotted time, pater. Reuven is pater. The achar hazman, however, again, if he's negligent and he doesn't take it down within the allotted time, and it falls down and does damage, chayiv. Okay, good. We'll say very intuitive. It's an interesting case. So we'll say Reuven and Shimon are neighbors. Reuven has a wall right next to Shimon's field. What happens? Reuven's wall falls down. Right? And what happens? So, right, Reuven's wall falls down, and now halacha l'maisa, Shimon says, get rid of your stones. Clean up your stones. Okay, whatever. Got it. Accidents happen. Clean up your stones. V'nafal. V'amr lo panei avanecha. V'amr lo. So Reuven says, listen to Reuven, Kuf Yud Ches Alef 119a. Higiyucha. Supposed to listen to this. So Reuven says to Shimon, you know what? The stones are yours. I'm mafkir them. Happy birthday, right? These are now your stones. Higiyucha. Rashi says, Him shalcha upnei osan la'atzmecha. So again, so Reuven says to Shimon, they're your stones now. You take it, you clean it up. So what's the halacha? Ein shomen lo. So we'll say, so we do not listen to Reuven. Now obviously, if Shimon wants the stones, then Shimon says shkoyach, so great, fantastic. But assuming that Shimon does not want the stones, so again, essentially, you say you can't force a gift on someone. That's the chap over here, right? You can't force a gift as much as, right, Reuven is in this magnanimous gesture of giving his stones to Shimon, which I will say, by the way, could be worth money. In other words, it shouldn't downplay, but it's worth something. But Lamaisa, again, if Shimon doesn't want it, Reuven cannot foist it upon him. However, we'll say, watch this. So scenario one, right? So here's the case, right? Reuven and Shimon are neighbors. Reuven's wall falls into Shimon's property. Shimon says, Reuven, clean up your stones. So Reuven says, you know what? It's my gift to you. They're yours. So if Shimon doesn't want it, then Reuven can't foist the gift upon him, and Reuven is obligated to clean up the debris. What happens if Shimon says, okay, I'll take it. Shimon goes ahead, cleans up the stones, takes the stones. Now Reuven comes back and Reuven says, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm happy to go ahead and pay you the expenses for cleaning up the debris, but I'd like my stones back. What's the halacha? In shomen lo. We don't have to listen to Reuven. Once you give it to Shimon, you gave it to him, nothing to talk about. Next. So we'll say, I hire a worker to gather my straw. And what happens? My worker comes along and he says, okay, pay me. And I say to the worker, you know what? Take straw as your form of payment. I don't want to pay you. I don't want to pay you money, but I'm going to pay you. But instead of paying you money, take straw as your payment. What's the halacha? Ein shomen lo. So ultimately, again, the worker does not have to go ahead and listen to me, and the worker could demand cash. Now, I will say this is a very novel ruling. Why is it novel? Look at Rashi. Ein shomen lo. Afagav de bechol duchti isle shave kesef kekesef. Hach gabe poel bal talent scharoksiv my daasni ba'adei mashma. So this is very interesting. Even though normally we say shave kesef in halacha, we look at an item of value like money. A worker is different. So this actually goes back to what we learned before. Since by a worker, the Torah goes out of its way to say, do not withhold his wage, right? And bepashtos, again, wage means money. So you see from here that a worker is really entitled to cash. Now again, if the worker wants to accept straw, that's fine, but he cannot be compelled to accept anything other than cash for payment. So therefore, again, I tell him to take straw. If he doesn't want it, I can't force him. So we'll say, what happens? Mishakibalav. Let's say again, I say, worker, take straw. Worker says, okay. He takes straw. And then afterwards, Va'amrlo helach scharecha. I say to him, you know what, I changed my mind. I'd like my straw. And I want to, right, maybe straw appreciates. And I tell him, you know what, I'm going to pay you your wage and give me back my straw. What's the halacha? So Amarlo helach scharecha v'ani etal shali in shomelo. Ultimately, again, the worker does not have to listen to me, and he's permitted to keep the straw. All right, so we'll say, so lots to unpack over here. Nifchasa. So we'll say, remember again, first case in the Mishnah. Ruvain has an olive press carved into the side of the mountain. Shimon has a field. On top, the ceiling of the olive press gives in. Now there's a gaping hole in the field. So what's the halacha? The halacha is that Shimon, the field owner, is allowed to go and plant on the floor of the olive press. So we'll say once again, nifchasa, how much of a collapse of the ceiling does there have to be in order to be able to trigger permitted use of the floor of the press? So nifchasa, Rav Amar Beruba. Rav says it's a collapse of the majority of the ceiling. Ushmuel Amar Ba'arba. Shmuel says 4 tfachim. Rav Amar Beruba. Rav says the majority. Aval Ba'arba Adam Zoreh Chetziav Lamata v'Chetziav Lamala. No, because Rav says if it's only four, then Lamaisa again plow your field on top, and you could plow a little patch corresponding to the hole on the bottom in the floor of the press. Shmuel says no. Ba'arba in Adam Zoreh Chetziav Lamata v'Chetziav Lamala. Shmuel says, no, even 4 tefachim. Why? You can't force a person to live in 2 spaces. I will say, very reminiscent of the exact Gemara we had on Sunday. Right? This is the same machlokes, Rav and Shmuel, about when the ceiling floor, right, when the floor of the second floor, the ceiling of the first floor collapses, how much of a collapse does there have to be in order to allow the upper story guy to descend and use the lower story? It's the same exact machlokes. To which the Gemara says, you're right. So why do you have to state the same machlokes, Rav and Shmuel, twice? Utzricha, you need it, I'll tell you why. If you would have just framed the machlokes, Rav and Shmuel, because also remember again on Sunday, what did we see? Right. So remember again, Shimon's living in the upper story, Reuven's living in the lower story. So Reuven's floor, Shimon's floor, Reuven's ceiling collapses. So the Mishnah said, if Reuven refuses to fix it, Shimon could go and live in Reuven's apartment. So machlokes Rav and Shmuel, how much of the ceiling has to collapse? So once again, Rav says majority, Shmuel says 4 tefachim. Why do you have to illustrate the same machlokes in 2 cases? It's the same yisod, right? We did it once by the apartment or by the house, and now another time by the field and the press. Why do you need to illustrate it with both? I'll tell you why. If you would have just spoken about the machlokes in the case of a dira, of a home, because we'll say in the case of an apartment, I would say, you know what, it's not normal for a person to live in 2 spaces. Right? To live a little bit here, a little there. Well, it doesn't make sense. A person doesn't live a little bit in the upper story, a little bit in the lower story. The Metzia person has their domicile in 1 space. The Gemara says, but in the case of planting, what's the big deal? What's the big deal if maybe again it is normal for a person to plant a little bit here, a little bit there, and therefore maybe Shmuel would agree with Rav that unless of course the majority of the ceiling of the olive press opens up, thereby rendering essentially the majority of the field unusable, there's no problem. Just let Shimon plant a little bit in both places. And if we would have just had the second case of the collapse of the roof of the olive press, this is where Rav holds his position about Rov. But in the case of the apartment or the house, maybe he agrees with Shmuel, therefore tzricha. So we'll say, so bottom line, the cases are dissimilar. The cases are dissimilar of the house and the garden, and the garden / olive press. But Lamaisa, same machlokes Rav and Shmuel applies by both cases. When there is a break in the floor ceiling, how much of a hole triggers the ability of the upper story to utilize the lower story? So Rav is going to say the majority, and Shmuel is going to say dalit tfachim. Incredible. So let's go back there. Nasno lo zman. Suppose now we're going to the next case in the Mishnah. Right? So Bezdin comes along and Bezdin sees that Reuven has a wall or a tree that needs to come down because it poses a danger. So remember again, then it falls down. So the Mishnah said if it falls down within the allotted time, so Reuven is not going to be chayiv. After the allotted time, i.e. Reuven did not remove it within the window, Reuven will be chayiv. Asks the Gemara, the kamazman, V'kamazman Bezdin. How much time generally does Bezdin go ahead and give someone to fix something that is broken? Rabbi Yochanan Shloshim Yom. Rabbi Yochanan says 30 days. That was generally, and I will say, I'm sure there could be cases where something posed a more immediate danger that you'd have to give someone a shortened window, but in general, in these kind of cases where Beis Din saw a tree that needed to come down or a wall that needed to come down, they would give the guy 30 days. And again, interestingly enough, if the wall falls down or the tree falls down and does damage during the 30 days, Reuven will not be chayiv. After the 30 days, Reuven will be chayiv for failure to take proper action. And I would say there is a tremendous Musar Haskell in this. And what is a tremendous Musar Haskell? It takes time to fix broken things. It takes time to fix broken things. Just because I know that something is broken and it needs to be fixed doesn't mean that necessarily I have the ability to do it right now. Right? Think about this in just a moment. Right? Beis Din is saying, Reuven, this wall needs to come down. Tell him it has to be done by tomorrow. It takes time. It takes time. You got to find the contractor. You have to be able to remove the debris. It has to be a controlled demolition. You can't just knock it down. There's a lot of factors. And if it's true with a tree and it's true with the wall, achas kama b'kama, it's true with ourselves as well. A lot of times in life, we know that there are changes we have to make. And I know that sometimes they're very acute changes and significant changes, meaningful changes that have to be made. And I sometimes make the assumption that the changes need to be made and they need to be made now. Now that may be true. Maybe the changes do need to be made now. But it's difficult to make changes on a dime. It's difficult to affect instantaneous change. Sometimes the best change model is one that is gradual, is one that has a little bit of a runway. Beis Din gives time for Reuven to take down that wall, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu also gives us time to make the changes we need to make. Sometimes the pitfall in life is if I feel like I can't make it instantaneously, then it's not worth making at all. Or if I feel that I can't do it all at once, then gradual change is simply worthless. And there's nothing further from the truth. You know, there's a whole discussion. Rav Kook, Rav Ami Yitzchak Cohen Kook, writes in his Oros HaTshuva. He writes in the world of tshuva, there's two different types of tshuva. There's what's called tshuva pitomis and tshuva hadragis. He says tshuva pitomis is like instantaneous change. Person just like instantaneously changed. And tshuva hadragis, like dargo, then there's gradual change. So Rav Kook has a whole discussion about which one is considered to be a higher level of change. So that's not our topic for today, but Lamaisa, just understand that there are these different change models, and tshuva hadragis it would appear, the most sustainable level of change. Change takes time. Just because you can't turn it around instantaneously, one should not have yeyosh that the change can't occur. Change takes time. Beis Din gives Reuven time to take down his tree, to take down his wall, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us time to affect the changes we need to affect. But there has to be a plan for change in place. There has to be a runway. There has to be an understanding of how I'm getting myself from point A to point B. Because like most things in life, without the plan, the change is not going to occur. Incredible. Let's go back there. Mishahaya Koslo. So the Gemara says, Hamid Diktani Seifa. So remember again, then we come to the last part of the Mishnah. The last part of the Mishnah was remember again, Reuven has a wall next to Shimon's field. Reuven's wall falls into Shimon's field, and what happens? Reuven says, Mazel Tov, the debris is yours. The debris is yours. Remember again, Shimon says, first case of Mishnah, Shimon says, no, thank you. So Reuven can't foist the gift upon Shimon, and therefore Reuven is obligated to go ahead and clean up the debris. So the Gemara says, Hamid Diktani sit, and I will say now, in case number 2 in the Mishnah, was that Shimon says, okay, I'll take it. And then again, a week later, Reuven comes back and says, by the way, I changed my mind. I want my stones back. Here's your expenses for debris clearing, and give me back my stones. So what's talacha? Shimon need not listen to Reuven. So here we go. So we'll say, since in the second case, Reuven comes back and he says, I want my stones back. Here is the expenses, right, for debris clearing. Michlal de paninu askina. So as you're talking about a case where the debris was already cleared. The Gemara says, Taiwa de paninu. Now the reason why Reuven can't get back his stones is because Shimon already cleared the debris. So the Gemara says, Halo paninu lo. Now it sounds like if Shimon did not get clear the debris, that Reuven maybe would have the ability to go ahead and take back his stones. The Gemara says, "Amai," but why is that? V'tikna lo sadehu. Shouldn't Shimon's field automatically acquire his property should automatically acquire the debris al tzkinyin chaser? Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina chatzir shel adam kona la shalom idaito. Let's remember again, your chatzir could acquire stuff for you even without your knowledge. So which the Gemara says, so both say, even without clear. So the Gemara is inferring over here that when does Shimon acquire the debris? When does he acquire it? When he clears it. His act of clearing it shows that he's willing to accept it. But why? Why should it take the clearing? Once the debris falls into his chatzar, then Shimon should acquire it as kinyan chatzar. To which one says, no. Hani, it's true. While it's true that yes, your chatzar could acquire for you, that's only when the owner of the property has in mind to convey ownership to you. See, we'll say over here, when the wall first falls and the debris is sitting in Shimon's field, and Reuven says, you keep it, right? The assumption we have at first glance is what? Is that Reuven doesn't really have in mind to do this. Rather, what is Reuven doing? Reuven is just simply trying to get out of the obligation to clean it up. It's only once Shimon actually goes in and cleans up the debris and takes it for himself, and Reuven doesn't object to that it's clear that Reuven had in mind to go ahead and convey ownership of the debris. Incredible. Let's go weiter. So I'll say then there was another case in the Mishnah. What was the second, or next case in the Mishnah? I hire a worker to clear straw, to cut straw, and now it's time for payment. He comes to payment. I tell him, keep straw for payment. What's the halacha? I can't do that. I can't do that. In other words, I can't force him to do that, but rather if he prefers cash, I have to give him cash. So we'll say, so b'pashtos, this is the same case. In other words, the straw case is the same thing as the fallen wall case, right? What's the theme of the Mishnah? You can't force someone to do something. In other words, in the case of the Mishnah, Reuven's wall falls into Shimon's garden, so Reuven can't force Shimon to go ahead and accept the stones, right, if he doesn't want them. In the case of the worker, I can't force my worker to accept straw as a form of payment. So the Gemara says, I don't understand why I need both cases. Utsricha, you need both cases. I'll tell you why. If you would have just said in the case of the wall, you know, in the case of the wall, where Reuven says, okay, Shimon, the rubble is yours. As well as yours. So we'll say, so there's no previous relationship between Reuven and Shimon. All right, so it's a gift. So Reuven's giving Shimon a gift. So in the case of a gift, I understand there's no reason to think that Reuven should be able to foist that upon Shimon. So I'll say, but in the case of the wage, right, where I'm paying my worker, maybe I can force him to accept straw because I owe him something, right? He is owed something from me. There is a financial relationship. Maybe there is my ability to tell him, I'm paying you in straw and you have to accept that. After all, as the famous adage goes, the Amri Inshi, as people say, Mimari Rishvasech Pe'eri Efra. When someone owes you money, even take bran. I will say what that means is when someone owes you money and they offer to pay you, take it. Take it. Even if the form of payment is not your preferred form of payment, take it and move on with your life. Because again, out of concern that if you don't take this, you may not be offered something else. Therefore, the Gemara says, Kamash Mala? No. Kamash Mala, when it comes to wages, a worker has the right to demand cash, and you cannot force him to take something else in lieu of cash. And bro say first wide line. And if it would have just said the case of the laborer, so I'll say, so again, so Lamaisa, I would have thought in the case of the straw, maybe even when the worker says, fine, I'll take straw, he doesn't really mean it, and he could then go ahead and turn and change his mind, right? Or the employer could also change his mind because there's a wage that's there. But in the case of the stones, if Reuven changes his mind and wants the stones back, since it really wasn't matana, I might have thought halacha l'maaseh should be entitled to. Therefore, tzricha. So we'll say, so once again, because the cases are dissimilar, therefore they both had to be stated. So in the case of the wall, Reuven can't force Shimon to accept the stones, but if Shimon does, no backsies, right? Reuven can't claim them back. And in the case of the wage, so employer can't force employee to accept something in lieu of cash. But once the employee does, bless you, then the employer doesn't have the ability to get back produce by offering cash. Okay, incredible. In Shomenlo. So what I say, halacha is we don't listen to him. I vatanya Shomenlo. But Rabbi said, but we learned elsewhere that in fact we do listen to him. So remember this. So we're talking over here now about the employee case, right? So I hire a worker. He's working with straw. I go ahead and so I owe him $500. I say, you know what? Take $500 worth of straw. So in case someone worker says, no, I want cash. So the halacha is he's entitled to cash. In case number 2, he says, okay. He says, okay, so I go ahead and give him the straw, or he takes the straw. Then afterwards, I turn around to him and I say to him, you know what? I really want my straw. So give me the straw back and I'll give you $500 of cash. So what's the halacha? So the worker he can agree to that if he wants to, but he need not agree to that. Doesn't have to agree with that. So the Gemara says, I vatanya shomenlo. We have another brisa that says that the worker does have to listen. Interesting. That he does have to listen. And halacha l'maisa, he has to go ahead and the worker has to accept the money and I can get back my straw. So the Gemara says, Amrav Nachman lo kashya, kan b'shlo, kan b'shal chavero. Two different cases. So ultimately, one is talking about a case where the worker is working for me, right? So halacha l'maisa again, where the worker is working for me. So then once I give him the straw, no backsies. But if I hired him to work for someone else, and now again he's working in someone else's field. I hired him, but he's working with someone else's field. In that case, again, when I paid him with straw, I can get the straw back and replace it with cash. So Amalei Rabbi Rav Nachman b'shalom my taima. When I've hired the worker and he's working for me, why is it that I can't back out of our agreement and replace the straw with cash? Because ultimately, again, you can say the wages upon you. Say when you hire someone to do work in someone else's field, you, the hirer, is also responsible. If I hire a worker to work in my field, but then I put him to work in my friend's field, what's the halacha? No sin, no schara mishalim. I have to pay the worker myself. Also, and then I could go and collect afterwards from the balabayas whatever benefit he got. So Rabbi said this is very interesting. Now the Gemara goes ahead and changes it and says like this. When do we say that you can't renege on the offer of straw? That's when the worker is working for me. Once I paid him with straw, that's it. However, again, when is the case where I can renege? In other words, I could demand the straw back and give him money. That's when the worker was working with hefker, ownerless produce. Ownerless produce. So if you look at Rashi, the Bishal Hefker, Shomen lo, Da'amar le kani be'at d'ledidei lo kani le, Ranachn l'tamei Da'amar la'el, ha'magbiyah mitzil l'chaver lo kana chaver, nimtza she'in pulaso alav, ve'in kan bal talin. So we'll say, so here's what it comes down to. Let me just tell you the principle, and then we'll see the application afterwards. The idea is like this. When do we say that an employer owns a worker a wage? That's when, let me say it differently. We saw in the Mishnah that the reason why can't, okay, let me go say it differently again. Normally we say shaveh kekesef kekesef, that an item worth money is like money. So if that's the case, why can't I pay my worker in produce? The answer is because the Torah says, lo salin pu'ulas sachir. You can't withhold wages. Wages. The fact that it says wages indicates to us what? Money. You have to pay your worker with money. If the worker wants to take something else, that's his business, but you have to pay him with money. The only time you have to pay him with money is when the halacha views him as your worker. But if he's performing a service for you, but halachically he doesn't really register as your worker, then technically you could pay him with shaveh kesef, with an item of value. So the Gemara Rav Nachman is suggesting is like this. So when the worker is working with my produce, right, or working in my field, I have to pay him money, right? And even if I want to pay him produce, I can't do that. I have to pay him money. What if I have him working with hefker? So I will say, because hefker, technically speaking, is not yet mine, right, is not yet mine. Therefore, again, he's not really deemed my employee. If he's not really deemed my employee, then what? Then Allah I can pay him with produce. Pay him with produce, I don't have to pay him with cash. That's the concept. That's the concept. So the Gemara says, Kam b'shol hefker, Eisir Rav Nachman, Shav Rav is Kashav Nachman, Metzias Paul Yatzmo. So what is interesting? Let's say a worker is working and he finds something during the course of his employment. He finds an object, so what's halakha? He's permitted to keep it himself. Emasai, when is that? Bizman Shamrla Balabayis, Nochish Imiyayom or other Imiyayom. So when I hire a worker for a very specific task, I say to the worker, I'm hiring you to go out and plow my field or to weed my field. I'm hiring to do something specific. And during the course of his day, he finds something. He finds a $100 bill. That's his. That's his. However, the Gemara says, "Aval Amar Avalim Amar Lo Aseimi Malacha Hayom Metzia Balabayis." But if I say to the worker, "I'm hiring your services for the day," that's it. I don't tell him for what. I just say, "I'm hiring your services for the day." Then Rabbi say, if he finds something, then who does that belong to? Me, the employer. Rabbi say, hear the distinction. When I hire him for a specific task, and again, I'm hiring for the day to do that task. So again, when he finds something that belongs to him, when I hire him as a worker for that day, he's mine for that day. Mine, not literally. He's mine for that day. Then when he finds something, then Metzia belongs to me. So the Gemara will say, if that's the case, then if I'm hiring him for the day, even if he's working with Hefker, he's still my employee. If he's my employee, then halacha l'maisa, I should have to pay him a wage and can't substitute produce. Amrav Nachman lo kasha is very interesting. Kan bahagba, kan bahabata. So we'll say the Gemara is suggesting over here as follows. Both are talking about cases of hefker. I'm hiring worker to work with hefker produce. One is talking about a case where he's actively working with the produce, he's lifting it up. In that case, I have to pay him actual money because through the lifting it up, ultimately, again, it's acquired for me, and therefore it's considered to be my direct employee, versus the second case where I could technically pay him in produce is where I'm paying him to watch Hefker produce. Literally, again, watch it. In Habat Arbos, in a case of watching it, ultimately, again, there is no action. So because there is no action, because there is no Hagbah, he's not considered to be my direct employee. Because of that, I could pay his wage even with produce. Amar Rabbi says, Habata behefker tanai. By the way, just in general, the concept of looking at hefker as a form of acquisition is in and of itself a machlokes tanoim. So the Gemara says, Disnan shomrei sviche shvius. What's the interesting case over here? So let's say it's a Shemitah year. So I'll say, remember again, even during a Shemitah year, stuff grows by itself. So people who are hired by Beis Din to go ahead and guard Shemitah growth. Now, I remember again, what do I need Shemitah growth for? I do need barley. I need barley for the Karban Omer, and I need wheat for the Shtei HaLechem. Right? I need produce. So Beis Din would hire people to kind of watch over produce that would be needed for sacrificial purposes. So what's the halacha? Nostlin schara mitrumas halishka. They get their salary from the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yossi says, harotze misnadefu v'shomer chinam. Rabbi Yossi says that's not true. That's not true. Rather, again, Rabbi Yossi, because they're just watching it, so they don't acquire it on behalf of the Beis HaMikdash. So because of that, if Reuven is there, if he's watching it or he acquires it, it becomes his. If he wants to subsequently donate it to the Beis HaMikdash, he has the right to do so. Amr lo ata omer kain. They said, Rabbi Yossi, if you say this, ein ba'in mishal tzibor. Ultimately, again, that means that the crop, the produce that's brought, is not communally owned crop. Rather, again, it's individually owned. And that's the problem, because the ma'isa, again, karbanos, these particular karbanos, have to go ahead and come from communally owned items, to which the Gemara says, what are they arguing about? Tanakama Savra Habata Behefker Kani. Tanakama holds that looking at Hefker acquires it. So the Gemara says, V'i yoy v'le igra in, v'i lo. So this is very interesting. So this is fascinating. So Tanakama holds that just stand by looking at Hefker with the intention to acquire it, you acquire it. Therefore, again, watch this. If Reuven is looking at, let's say, barley, right? So technically speaking, he acquires it. But one second, but the barley has to be communally owned. So how is that going to work? So the recommendation is pay him. Once you pay him, he's working for the Beis HaMikdash. Once he's working for the Beis HaMikdash, then his looking at it does not acquire it for his own purposes. Rather, it acquires it for communal purposes. However, if you don't pay him and he looks at the hefker and has in mind to acquire it, he's acquiring it on his own behalf, which then precludes its use for Karban Omer because it's individually owned. Rabbi Yossi says, no. How about the behefker lo kani? No, not true. Looking at hefker does not acquire hefker. Looking at it, Hagbah acquires it. V'chi azli tzibur umaisi hashtuhu de kazachi bey. And ultimately, again, when the tzibur goes in and brings it, that's when they acquire it. Ma ata omer. So what does it mean with that phrase, ata omer? Hachi kamerle. This is what they mean to say to him. Midvarecha ledvareinu ein omer ushtei alechem by mishal tzibur. based on what you're saying, the carbon omer and shtei lechem never comes from communal funds. Amar Rava, no. Rava says not true. In reality, looking at hefker acquires hefker. So we'll say, what are we concerned about over here? Now, even if technically speaking, even if looking at hefker acquires hefker, that's fine. That's fine. It just requires Ruvain to convey ownership over the barley to the Beis HaMikdash. What are we concerned about over here? We're concerned about that Ruvain is not going to fully give it over. He's not going to give it over b'leiv shalim. The Rabbanan savi yavile igra ve'ilo chayshinan shemalo yimshen yafe yafe. The Rabbanan say pay him money. Once you pay him money, then we are convinced that Allah Lamaisa, he will give over ownership of the item with a full heart to the Beis HaMikdash. But if you don't pay him money, we're concerned that he retains some level of ownership over it, which is problematic. Rabbi Yossi savar lo chayshinan shemalo yimshen yafe yafe. Rabbi Yossi says, no, we're not concerned that he's not going to give it over properly. And therefore, no need to give him a wage. We just assume he's going to give it over properly. Uma ata omer. What does it mean when they said to him ata omer? This is what it means to say midvar lecha ledvarenu chayshinan shema lo yimsrein yafe yafe. We're concerned, based on what you're saying, that he's not going to fully give over ownership over the barley to the Beis HaMikdash, to which the Gemara says, Ein omer ushtei alechem ba'in mishal tzibor. And as a result, the omer ushtei alechem will not come ultimately again from communal funds. Ikadam, an alternate version. They're supposed to say the last two lines. Rava Amar, the kuli amma bata behefker lokani. Everyone agrees looking at hefker doesn't acquire hefker. We'll say, what are we concerned about over here? We're concerned that halacha l'maisa, if you don't hire someone to watch over this, people, more aggressive chevra, are going to come and claim this produce for their own. The Tanakama Savar, the Takin Rabban Alamesav, the Arbazuzi Keche de Leshame Bal Yisrael. So the Tanakama says like this: we pay the guy to watch the barley and the wheat, right, for communal sacrificial purposes. Why? Because when we pay him, people will hear about the fact that a guy is being paid to watch over produce for the Beis HaMikdash, and what? They won't take it for themselves, because they're going to hear it's being watched in the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, they'll separate themselves, because again, they're not going to take stuff that's being watched in the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yossi Savar, Rabbi Yossi will say, Amud Beis, Rabbi Yossi Savar, Lo Takinu. No, Chazal did not institute that. Amud Beis, so what does it mean when it says Ma'at Omer? This is what it means to say, based on your words, so ultimately again, the produce will not come from communal funds. So it's what I said before, that's really the machlokes. Everyone agrees that ultimately, again, according to this approach, everyone agrees that habata behefker, looking at hefker, does not acquire the item. If that's the case, then why is the Beis HaMikdash hiring someone to watch over the grain and watch over the wheat during the Shemitah year for the purpose of Omer and Shtei Alechem? They're concerned that somebody else is going to come along and strong-arm their way to taking this produce. By hearing that the Beis HaMikdash went ahead and hired someone, the Ba'ali's roast, the aggressive people will stay away and leave that for the Beis HaMikdash. So the shaila is, do you have to pay a wage to the watcher in order for the Ba'ali's roast to be scared off? That's the machlokes Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi. So I will say, so just to kind of go back full circle. So remember again, so halacha l'maisa, for our purposes, here's what comes out. When it comes to an employee of yours, now how do you define an employee? Anyone for whom you have a prohibition of Baal Tulin. We learned extensively about Baal Tulin. I say anyone for whom you have a biblical prohibition to delay in the payment of their wages, you have to pay them in cash. You don't have the right to substitute an item of value for cash. Now, if the employee says, I'll take it, right? He doesn't mind taking the straw, taking whatever you're paying him in, then of course that's fine. But if he does insist on cash, even Rabbi said now the chiddush is, even though normally throughout all of halacha we say shava kesef kekesef, an item of value has the same status as cash itself. Halacha l'maisa, specifically when it comes to wages, you have to pay cash unless, of course, the employee agrees to take an item of value. So we'll say, by the way, how do we paskin by habat about it? This happens to be very interesting. Does looking at hefker acquire hefker? So we'll say, so listen to this. So the Gemara says, machlokes tanaim. How do we paskin? So we'll say, the Ram Hilchos Nadar and Parakimah Halacha Yutes says as follows: Davar hamufkar sheba echad ushamro v'hayamabit bo shelo yitlenu adam lo kano ba'bata ela ad shiagbiu. So we'll say salocha lemaisa. So just to illustrate the case, right? I'm walking on the street. There's a $100 bill. It's hefker. It's hefker. I see it. So we'll say, so what do I do? What do I do? I go ahead and I'm looking at it, and I dust off some of my high school basketball skills, and I am boxing out, right, anyone who's around. So clearly, what am I doing? I'm looking at it, and I'm guarding it. What am I not doing? What am I not doing? I haven't lifted it up. So that's called habata behefker. I'm looking at it, I'm guarding it. The Rambam Paskins, habata behefker does not acquire hefker. In order to acquire hefker, you require hagba or some other formal king. You need one of the formal kinyanim, but simply looking at it and guarding it does not affect acquisition. Incredible. Abba say, let's go weiter. Mishnah. Mishnah, Bosai. Our second to last Mishnah of Mesachs Bava Metzia. Hamotzi zevel Rosh Sarabim. So this is interesting. If you take out manure into Rosh Sarabim, now we've seen this before. One of these really interesting concepts over here that Chazal gave permission. Actually, we'll see it's earlier than Chazal. So Yoshua ben Nun already gave permission for people to put stuff in their Rosh. So for example, one of the things you're allowed to do is to put your manure you're allowed to clean out your stables. Where do you clean out your stables? Into the Rosh. So therefore again, hamotzi zevel Rosh, hamotzi motzi v'amzav mezabel. So we'll say the halacha is like this. As much as you're allowed to clean out manure, and you're allowed to clean out your stable into Rosh Hashanah, but you can't leave stuff in Rosh Hashanah. So if you're going to clean it out, you need to make sure that ultimately, again, it's there and then it gets removed relatively quickly. Samotzi motzi means the person cleaning it out. And I will say, now remember again, that is, as they say, one man's manure is another man's treasure, the famous adage goes. So remember again, manure is, I'm not sure exactly that's how it's said, but lamaisa, right? But lamaisa, again, the idea over here is, so manure is fertilizer, right? So remember again, that's valuable. That's valuable. So the idea over here is that the halakha is telling the person, clean it out, but then make sure someone else is taking it quickly. Right? In other words, make sure while you have a license to put in a shtarabim, you don't have license to leave it there for a prolonged amount of time. Samotzi motzi v'amezabam zav look at Rashi. Kolomar ein l'rashay la'shalso sham elazem motziom min harefes l'shtarabim v'anosie mezuman lisa'enu l'sadi l'gan hazevel. So in other words, the way it should work is if Reuven's cleaning out his barn or his stable, so he should call up Shimon and say, Shimon, by the way, I'm cleaning it out. So if you want this, or put, I don't know, make a clap, after Kiddush, on Shabbos, guys, don't let everybody know, this Shabbos gret, but I'm going to be cleaning out my stable on Monday. So Chevra, make sure you're there to collect. Okay. Ein shor tibishtab. So let's say some other halachas about things you're not allowed to do in Rosh Hashanah. You can't go ahead and soak clay, right, in the Rosh Hashanah. In other words, you can't start making clay in the Rosh Hashanah. Vein lovnim levana. You can't make bricks in Rosh Hashanah. So let's say obviously again. So these halachas make sense over here because lamaisa you're obstructing the use of the public domain and potentially creating pitfalls. So you can't do these in Rosh Hashanah. Aval govlin tit b'Rosh Hashanah. But you can knead. So apparently you can't go ahead and soak clay in Rosh Hashanah, but you can knead clay in Rosh Hashanah. All right, Rashi's fine. Rashi's laseis miyad bebinya. So apparently kneading is a much faster process. So you knead the clay and then you immediately use it for building right afterwards. Because the Gemara says aval lo levenim, but you can't go ahead and make bricks or knead bricks in Rosh Hashanah, because apparently kneading bricks is a more prolonged process. So we'll say, so what we're going to see over here, by the way, is you could use the Rosh Hashanah for a relatively quick process that is happening in Rosh Hashanah. So you could knead the clay because you're going to do that quickly, apply it to the building. You can't engage in more prolonged practices in Rosh Hashanah. Habone Rosh Hashanah, hamevi avanim mevi, va'abone bone. So we'll say ultimately again, if you're we'll have to let's finish this. Habone Rosh Hashanah. So we'll say somebody who's building in Rosh Hashanah, mevi avanim mevi. So if you're bringing stones in the Rosh Hashanah to build, you could do so, but just do it quickly. And if you damage someone, ultimately, again, you are obligated to go ahead and pay them for damage. You could even put building materials in the Rosh Hashanah, readying yourself for building that is going to take place. So stop over here for today. But again, what I just want to point out, what's happening over here in this Mishnah is saying that you can use the Rosh Hashanah almost like as a staging area. As a staging area for building. By the way, I was going to point out, this is my Simchol Yom. If you look at what happens next door, every single day, 7 Mile Lane is a staging area for what's happening in the building. They say, you can't use. So it's built into use of Rosh Hashanah that for temporary staging, you could use it to build in Rosh Hashanah. So it's a very lemaisa halacha. Last half of Bava Metzia tomorrow. Shkoyach, everyone. All right, Chavra Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Four Tzfachim, like Shmuel. 4 Tzfachim.